If you've been around the channel, you know that I've been releasing 4 songs a week all month long as a part of the rollout of an album I made with 17 producers from right here in this community. And tomorrow, the very last song from Community Collab Tape #1 is finally coming out. And this week, I'm really excited to welcome the producer that helped me make the final track on the album, Soulfy Beats. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to him to show you guys exactly how he made the starting sample, and I'll pick it back up to show you how we turned it into a full song. See you in a few.
Hello guys, I'm Nicolas, also known as Soulfy Beats. I'm a saxophone player and music producer from Cali, Colombia, and I'm gonna break down how I made the initial idea / loop I sent to Loop for the Community Beat Tape #1. So starting off, we have some basic chords which I laid down using soft piano by Spitfire Audio, and I just had some basic chords on A minor, starting with a C major chord, followed by an E minor chord with the 11th added, then an A minor chord, and finally a G major chord. So it all sounds like this. After that, I laid down the same chords, but using a pad sound from Hybrid Keys. This is the Profound Pad preset, just to have like to fill in like sort of space behind those arpeggiated piano chords, and it sounds like this. So I wanted it to be like sort of in the middle and have like a mid-range sound. So I did some EQ to it to get rid of the lows and the highs. And then I also added some spread. And after I had like that basic vibe going on, I just came with this melody on my tenor saxophone. So the idea with this melody was to kind of fill out some spaces after the piano, like this. You know, so it would like blend in better instead of like clashing with it. And then I doubled that melody, again using the soft piano, just like the same notes. So I penciled in those because I'm not a very good piano player. And then after I sent that to Luke and going back and forth with some ideas, we needed another melody for the bridge of the song. So I recorded this other melody again with my tenor saxophone. So this is more sort of like, I mean, it's still melodic, but more of like a solo type melody, if you would. And then like the main loop together sounds like this. And that's it. Thank you. Thanks to Luke again for the opportunity, and be sure to join our Discord. We have a very great community. We're very supportive of each other, and be sure to be subscribed to Luke's channel. Peace.
Big shout out to the server's very own Sax Man for this beautiful sample. Let's dive right in to see exactly what I did to it to help turn it into a full track. So the first thing I did was just a little bit of mixing on that piano part here. You can see I've just got a stack basically of compression and EQ to try to shape it just the way I like. A little bit of automation in there, but mostly just trying to make room for the bass and the other instrument layers I was going to be adding later. Quick peek, we got RC20 at the top, just a slightly modified version of the default preset. I turned the noise off, wobbles turned down a little bit. I think I left the distortion and the space alone, and I turned the magnetic down. So we just got a little bit of high and low cut going on, pretty gentle on that default preset. TDR Nova to help clean up some of the muddiness. There was a very low, kind of low mid, rich piano sample, and I figured that was going to be fighting with the bass a bit. We've got a high pass EQ that's automating down throughout the intro, which you can see right here. Just starts kind of, well, starts here, around 230 hertz, just taking some of those lows out, and that goes to the intro, and then I bring that back up here at the outro again. Limiter, just squashing some of those peaks. Another EQ, cutting those lows out, leaving space for the bass. Another limiter, squashing even more of the peaks. Another EQ, this time doing a little bit more peak filtering and cleaning up even more of that muddiness I wasn't quite getting enough of with the TDR Nova. And yet another fruity limiter on the compression function. All of these are on the compression function, by the way. Just once again, squashing it. So I'll go ahead and play that, toggling our VSTs on and off a couple times. You can hear what it started as and what it turned it into. So this was no plugins. Plugins on. Just kind of brightens it up, takes a lot of that low out, which slowly comes in as the intro builds. So you can hear that that and the high piano part are routed to this verb pad layer, another popular technique of mine that I've talked about a few times on the channel. We've essentially just got a Valhalla Supermassive mixed to 100% on a really large setting, turned way down in the mix with some EQ to cut out some low rumble here. So all that's going to do is just take the audio signals that I'm feeding into it. In this case, we've got the main piano, the piano melody, the keys that I bring in later in the bridge, and even to a lesser extent some of the saxophone parts, and I think probably even my guitars. It didn't seem like I did the guitars, just a couple of the pad layers this time. And that's just kind of meshing everything together into this really long tail, huge pad. So while that was playing, you may have heard this bass part come in. That was one of the first melodic components I really added. To do that, I went to a plugin that was new to me at the time. It's called Virtual Bassist VB Mellow. I picked it up for free in like a Black Friday sale or whatever. They've got like a option to play it as an instrument, or you can have it played pre-programmed grooves, I think. I haven't really messed around with that too much. A ton of really nice presets. It's all upright basses, but they've got like really different sounds. Some a little more like electronic and kind of wonky. Some just feel like a straight up upright bass. I ended up going with a boom bap preset. I felt like it had a nice rich sub frequency there without too much of a plucky transient that I figured would not be getting in the way too much. Around the time that bass comes in, I introduced a nice simple shaker loop. I believe this is from Mondo Loops Packs, as are a couple of these Foley loops I dragged in. So you can see pretty classic example here, is particularly in the percussion, honestly, where every 4 bars we've got something new coming in. So this piano melody comes in kind of gently through the first 4 bars, bass and shaker come in, full drum accompaniment with an additional Foley loop. Foley loop 2 comes in, 4 bars later, Foley loop 3, while Foley loop 2 drops out. So literally every 4 bars, we've got some new percussive or instrument layer coming in here. On top of that, arrangement-wise, 4 bars into the drop, I did lay down a little bit of guitar, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about this being the very first track I ever worked on that I got to mix some saxophone on. I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts on how you think I ended up doing. So, as a ear freshener, this is what the sax sounded like kind of out of the box when Soulfy sent it to me. It is so quiet without my processing, so I'll just solo it. This is what it sounds like soloed once Soulfy sent it to me. You can hear the reverb, obviously. So, of course, this is like intended at the time to be a really sleepy album. I think this was one of the earlier tracks I worked on. And there was plenty of body in this. It's a nice tenor sax sample, but I was really picturing this kind of washed out, a little bit more in the background, a little bit more as like a foundational melodic element, less a lead. So I decided to try to kind of like force it into that space a little bit, at least as best as I could. But the first thing I did is I needed to get the gain up. It was pretty quiet as it was. So I boosted the gain 5 dB directly on the audio through a Fruity compressor, which I do not think is hitting anything with the threshold. This is really just to throw 8 dB of gain on it. Another Fruity limiter here. This time we are really squishing it down. There were a couple notes that like really jumped out. So I brought that threshold way down with a really strong ratio just to really squish it and let it be that kind of like background foundational element I was picturing. RC20 is doing a lot of heavy lifting on the mix of the saxophone, to be perfectly honest. I decided to keep the noise on this preset on the muff type. I wanted it to follow the saxophone, so as the saxophone came in, it got louder, but it wasn't just kind of like constantly playing like an ambience would. Again, wobble and magnetic are pretty low. I tend not to keep these too high in my mix. Distortion's cranked and the reverb is cranked on top of it being routed to that verb pad layer. So this is really kind of transforming the sound by itself. So if we just like listen to the compression here, then RC20. So of course you can hear that there's some harshness still going on. That's what I started doing with the EQ. I wanted to take a lot of that breathiness out and let it kind of sink away into the background. So I ended up boosting a lot of the lows that I took out of, you know, the other piano parts to really rich up whatever body I left after the RC20. And then the second EQ, just cut those out. Anything unneeded under 100 Hertz. So essentially these two things are combining to make a relatively mid-focused mix. It's just kind of like an ugly, weird way to do it. I'm not actually entirely sure why I did it that way. But altogether, the sax mix ended up sounding like this. I'll turn that reverb off for now. Without effects. Then in the context of the drop, maybe. Also, sorry about all the weird clicks and pops. I had to bounce the audio out of my amp simulator on the guitar, which gave me some artifacts that I didn't feel like toiling with to clean up, but basically just trying to preserve the CPU. I promise, in the release version, it's not as clicky or poppy, but I decided to let that play through so you get a sense of what I was about to be talking about. That's exactly what I did with my guitar effects chain. So for reasons I can't explain, I started things off with a limiter. Apparently I didn't like how inconsistently I was playing this part that day, so I just squashed it all before the amp simulator, which was, of course, the Archetype Plini Electric Sunrise intro preset. I promise I have some new guitar tones that will be appearing on the channel in the near future. We're just working through the tape that I made literally back in March, so this was my go-to for a long while there, and I still bring it out every once in a while, so it's not going to be the end of it on the channel, don't you worry. Got a Fruity soft clipper and a little bit of saturation after that amp sim. Of course, a nice high-pass EQ. Once again, anything below 100 Hertz, get rid of them rumbles we do not want. A kilohertz transient shaper. This is a free plugin, very effective, does its job well, and it's probably the culprit as to why bouncing this to audio is giving me clicks and pops, or at least one of them anyway. But long story short, if you got a very plucky sound, or in this case the amp sim tends to like really pull the pick sound out on this particular setting, the transient shaper after the amp sim does a good job of getting rid of a lot of that pick noise. Fruity soft clipper, again, we're just adding a little bit more of saturation, another bit of compression. We're just kind of squashing this down, doing the same thing we did with the saxophone, let that be a more background foundational element. I wanted this to be very like almost symphonic with not symphony type instruments, where everything's kind of combining and creating a soundscape, and less so letting one thing be the leader here. And we cap that off with another EQ. once again, dipping that 270 hertz. Yeah, that was the little bit of processing I did on that guitar line. You'll hear a little bit later that a second guitar comes in. That was sent through the exact same recorded chain, but the one difference is that this high guitar part got an additional set of basically all of the same type things. I threw a couple of transient shapers on, even more EQ, even more limiting, or compression rather. Just really looking to shape the sound, take out any harshness. So other than that, you heard the drum groove. I added this nice little choir layer to complement Soulfy's pad that he had. Those, I feel like those come together for this nice kind of like angelic body to the whole track. You'll probably notice I've got a bunch of automation layers kind of peppered all around this thing. Most of them are EQ automations, and then usually an extra layer to just turn it off so that I'm not getting any of those residual kind of like ladder tails of things that I don't want, creating phasing issues that I'm not expecting. A little bit of stereo separation automation here, a little bit of volume automation on the bass so that we get some energy variance between the drops and the bridge. I think that is all of the automation stuff. So finally, let's just tackle exactly what we did with the bridge. Soulfy touched on this real quick, said that he laid down a slightly more lead part with his tenor, which I really like how that came out. Ended up mixing that pretty much the same, obviously different effects chain, different plugins, and this sample happened to be a bit louder to begin with, so the processing just looked a little bit different, mostly as far as the compression goes. But long story short, RC20 doing all the heavy lifting, transforming the sound, bunch of EQs to get it in the shape that I liked on that day. Yeah, I decided not to route this one to the reverb pad, so it was sitting a lot more forward in the mix. Outside of that, I decided I wanted to simplify the piano part a good bit, so Soulfy had laid down this piano here, and I basically just went in and muted some notes to try to leave a little bit more space to breathe and let that saxophone really sing as we're getting through there. I think that's really the bulk of what I did. Obviously a little bit of arrangement work as I took what was a pretty short loop, turned it into a full song. We had nice back and forth, especially as we worked out this bridge. But long story short, Soulfy absolutely killed it on the sample, and I did what I could to bring it over the finish line. So once again, huge shout out to Soulfy Beats for popping on the channel. I'm gonna link all of his socials down in the description. Definitely check out his music. He is the best saxophone player in our Discord server. If you want to listen to the full album, all the tracks that have already been released, and this one will be coming out tomorrow, I'll be linking a playlist with the other 16 tracks at the top of the description. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I'm gonna let this play us out. I'll see you guys next week. Peace.